So this is a really fantastic podcast with Stuart Lloyd. I think you're going to get a lot of benefit from this podcast. Stuart really is an expert on innovation. Stuart's been at the intersection of creativity and commerce for a long, long time. That's why he's flown all the way around the world working with big multinational conglomerate companies. And it's a pretty rare set of circumstances that have allowed me to grab Stuart and get him in for this podcast. So some of the skills and techniques he's going to be able to share with you are not easily accessible. We talk about why innovation is so important, but beyond that, how to actually come up with those innovative ideas. We talk about brainstorming and how it's actually a piece of technology that's over 50 years old. So guess what? There are better, more powerful, more productive tools and techniques that we can use to inspire those innovations. We talk about his latest book, Pivot Power, and why he's actually come up with 20 different pivoting techniques which we can use to come up with our own ideas, concepts. We stumble across Sturgeon's law, a law of creativity I've never even heard of before. So we talk all about that as well. So without further ado, let's dive into the podcast.
Okay, so today I predominantly want to sort of focus on the area of innovation because I know you've got a lot of expertise in that area. So the first question I want to kind of hit you with really is innovation really that important?
It's only important if you want to survive. if you're interested in your business having a future, I would say it's absolutely paramount. Now, the thing is, well, what if, you might say, I've got a great successful business? Do I need to innovate? Well, yes, because a good idea is not a good idea for all time. So if we look at the churn rate of Fortune 500s, for example, now, it's just shrinking and shrinking and shrinking as each year goes by. Before, a big successful company that was in a Fortune 500 was in there for a long time, averagely 50, 60, 65 years. That's now come down to about 12 years.
Wow.
Right? So what does that mean? Well, it means that the world's changing, the consumers are changing, the market's changing, the technology's changing. So what made you successful is not necessarily the thing that's going to guarantee any success in the short to medium term. And, often, I do a lot of work with, say, Citi-Bank, for example. I'll say, you guys are a big, successful company, have been for 208 years. Fantastic, congratulations, great legacy. But the thing that made you successful for those 208 years is not the same thing that's going to guarantee you success in 208 years from now. And, something like the banking financial industry is a great example because now we've got so much fintech and making especially executives in big organizations understand that, a shiny gray suit and a big corner office is something nice to aspire to. But hey, you know what? There's a couple of young guys with a smartphone in Silicon Valley or in Bangalore that are just dying to bring your big organization down. And what's more, those two guys in a smartphone can do it.
Yeah, that's kind of phenomenal. And I suppose really encouraging as being a small guy so I guess you're saying, it's going to be my next question really, is innovation possible for small companies, individuals, or is innovation really the sort of luxury of these, big companies that have got R&D budgets and researchers and market researchers, etc.?
Yeah, it's counterintuitive actually. Let's perhaps zoom out and look at the big picture, the context of it. Big companies have traditionally got deep pockets, throw a lot of money at R&D, et cetera, et cetera. But if we look across the board at innovation, there is something like a 70% failure rate. So you say, sure, I innovate. Yes, but there's a 70% chance that you'll fail. Okay, so then I won't innovate. All right, then there's probably 100% chance that you will fail. So take your pick, damned if you do, damned if you don't. So this is the quandary that we're in as the world changes shape. And, it's been doing that with creaks and groans and stress fractures over the last 10, 15 years since whenever the start date of digital disruption came in. The world's been doing that. But the interesting thing in the light of the COVID crisis is whatever changes were afoot, suddenly it's like, bang, we don't have the option anymore. It's not a luxury anymore. We need to think completely differently about how we're doing business. It's been forced upon us. We've now got a gun at our heads. So that's really what it's come down to. So the big picture is there's a massive failure rate in doing it, but there's almost guaranteed failure in not doing it. Now, smaller companies, smaller teams are much better at innovating because they're not saddled by the baggage of bureaucracy, or what I call the sort of the deep keel of the big sort of ship, like a super tanker. Fortune 500 has a very deep keel, which means it's got incredible resistance to changing direction, and it certainly can't change direction at speed, right? So you've got all these factors going against it, not to mention mindset, and that's probably the biggest thing. It's easier, especially if you're a big successful company, just keep on doing it because, well, we're big and successful, aren't we? But you don't realize that there is an end point to that. And I guess I'm the sort of chairman of what I call the Flat Earth Society, because you can keep on sailing your great big super tanker, but at some point that will go off the edge of the earth and everybody in your team will go off the cliff together. So in terms of innovation capability, small teams, people working in, I say, 2 guys in a garage is the cliche, much, much better at innovating, just because you can try stuff out. The downside of not succeeding is not massive. Whereas
maybe that's the underlying thing, is maybe this risk, right? There's an inherent risk with something new. And if you've got to work for a boss and you've got, your quarterly review at the end of the month, or sales targets, or whatever sort of KPI measurement you are judged by, you're going to rightly sort of focus on that. You don't want a big red blob on your kind of resume, as it were. And therefore, unless you've been specifically tasked with being innovative, then it's an inherent risk to do so. I remember, I'm just thinking about it right now, probably the first kind of innovative thing I did, and at a very, very small level, was I was working as a designer in a publishing company. And we'd lost a contract, business wasn't doing well, and I kind of secretly went off and tried to find a new contract. Actually, it took me a frigging year to land this client. But I didn't tell the boss anything about it. And I guess I didn't tell him because I didn't want to be seen as a failure if I didn't tell him I had nothing to lose. So I just did all the meetings in private. And eventually, the first time I ever told the boss was, oh, by the way, boss, his name was Neil, I've got a meeting tomorrow to land this client. And it became our biggest client we'd had in probably 5 years, and kept the business alive. But I did that, and I would have probably, at least at that time, been scared to do it kind of publicly, because it was a total shot in the dark, really. A totally new type of client. Didn't know it's going to come off, but obviously when it eventually did, I got a lot of pats on the back and felt really good about myself. But yeah,
great example. And you've touched on 2 great points there. One is it's always easier to get forgiveness than to get permission, right? So that's one of the things in the,
I don't know,
in
my
the
ex
Maverick
might disagree.
Manifesto. In the Maverick Manifesto, that's up there in terms of great things to abide by. So go ahead and do stuff, and if you can get some glory as you did, fantastic. We're on a winner. Now, the other thing you touched on there is such an overlooked point. When I work with executives, particularly in big companies, I say, right, what's in your KPIs? What are the things in your KPI that speaks specifically to you undertaking innovation activities? And there's nothing usually in there. There's nothing which is a bullet point which says, you must spend 10% of your time exploring, discovering, trying, falling over, failing, looking for the future. There's nothing which says that. However, at the town hall, the CEO will be saying, we must be innovative, charge to the top of the hill, we've got to change, we've got to be creative, etc., etc. But this is just the way that companies work. If it's not in your to-do list, if it's not on your KPIs, which you're going to be judged against, held against, if there's not a bullet point there for it, it's not going to get done. Guess what? Because everybody's too busy chasing the day-to-day line responsibilities. Everyone's too busy. And of course, the day-to-day, doing my line work every day is going to be a priority every single time. And you made the great point. Who wants that red blob or that big black mark against your resume? Nobody wants their thumbprint on a possible failure. And so, if we say, all right, I'm going to charge off and do this thing, and I'm going to get involved in, I'm going to put my hand up, get involved in this innovation project, because I know it's going to be a sure win, everybody's going to be involved in it. But you don't know it's going to be a sure win. So what if it's a failure? And then people go to ground and say, oh, better I don't get involved. Keep your head down, because you keep your head down beneath the parapet, it can't get shot off. Yeah. And this is how people succeed in corporate careers, just by keeping their head down. But that doesn't ensure the survivability of your company in this day and age.
Yeah, I think a lot of the sort of tech guys have really led the way on that ideology, if you like. I believe it's Google that give their staff, is it half day off a week or a day off a week? Not day off work, but to go and explore a solo project, and without kind of being observed. It's like, it's kind of private time, go and explore.
Yeah, the 20%.
Yeah. Is it Google that does that? I think it is.
It is Google and many others, but we've got to go backtrack 50 years, actually. 3M started that 50 years ago, and I think it was 15% time.
Wow.
And, some companies give it 10%. 3M, who started this a long time ago, was 15%, but Google sort of shared or snared all the glory for this 20% thing in the modern day era.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one way of doing it, in terms of saying, well, all right, you go off and work on an approved project under some sort of supervision of your boss. So, he kind of rubber stamps what it is that you're spending your time on, some sort of passion project, something you're interested in. And there's a lot of evidence to show that great stuff comes out of that, because what it means, and honestly, I'm a fan of a 10%. Mm-hmm. If you just got 10% of your eye on the future of what's next, what if, you're going to hopefully uncover some stuff. You're going to be stumbling across some interesting new areas, some new rabbit holes, some new possibilities. But, so even 10% doesn't sound like much, but, most people don't even spend 1% on, the eye on the future. What does our business look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? They're just not doing it. But it brings us, I think, to really the crux of how does innovation work most successfully in an organization? And I think there are two schools of thought. One is that you capability build the whole organization, fire people up with pep talks and training programs and things like that, and everybody becomes an innovation dynamo, and we become this massive creative organization. There's not much evidence to show that that's worked so well so far. Why? Because, naturally, only about 10% of people are natural born innovators, creators, imagineers, those sort of people. And a lot of it comes back to mindset. I come from a psychology background, and I think this is where the majority of work needs to be done. And there's cultural differences here as well. Working a lot in Asia Pacific, as I do, there are cultural things which are baked in. Say with the Chinese culture, the idea of ruffling feathers, for example, is not, from day one they're taught not to ruffle feathers. In fact, there's a great expression which is, the first bird to fly is the first bird that gets shot down. Wow. So if you're brought up knowing that, or having that instilled in your psyche, why on earth would you go into the workplace and be the first bird to fly? So you're waiting for others to fly, so the safety in numbers, etc., with the net result that nobody flies.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is a lot of that. So the bit that works better, and I think there's a lot of practice proven papers now to bear this out, and certainly anecdotally in my experience with companies, is that you need to go back to what I call the Steve Jobs pirate ship model, where you say, all right, here's our mothership organization. This is where we follow the rules. This is where we say, yes, sir. This is where we fine-tune the processes for maximum effectiveness, efficiency, ISO standards, et cetera, repeatability. And this is, let's not underestimate that. I tend to be very punkish and very impetuous in the way that I think and work and preach fire and brimstone. But I respect the fact that process is process, and as long as the process is the process, particularly in a big company, a big manufacturing company, or a big financial company, you've got to follow the process. You've got to adhere to the rules, regulations, et cetera. But here's where it works. If you say, if we're trying to find the future, we need to hive off something, a little pirate ship on the side. And those people sit in a separate building, far from the head office, far from day-to-day line of responsibility, with a separate budget, and without the monthly and quarterly financial accountabilities. Because if you're looking for ROI, short-term ROI on innovation, guess what? You're not going to get it. So managers in big companies are brought up like that. And that's what they learn at management school. Here's the Excel spreadsheet. Here's the money in, here's the money out. Here's the budget. How do we go against budget? And especially in American companies, it's quarterly. Otherwise, Wall Street comes and, shits down our neck. If that's what your managers are brought up in, suddenly this whole thing of innovation of, hey, we're just digging for dirt here. We might hit some oil, we might not. It might be next Monday, but, it might take us 2 years. We don't know. The whole thing of we don't know is just anathema to a typical corporate manager. They need to know, they want to know, and therefore they don't know how to manage that. The unknowns, the uncertainties. Yeah. So, take a great example, DBS Bank in Singapore. Massive conglomerate, 22,000 people. They had really a case study transformation exercise over the last 5-6 years, driven by their CEO right from the very top, who envisioned a different kind of a bank, turning this sort of quasi-government institution around to something which was customer-centric, et cetera. And they managed to do that, and really, I say, inculcated sort of the mindset into the people, got their top leaders to realize that, hey, we're under threat from the two guys in the garage, et cetera, got them into the sort of hackathon mentality. And that was right from the very, very top and right from through the top layers of management. And then that behavior, see, when you model the behavior, it cascades down. The problem is usually middle management, upper middle management, these are the guys that got most to lose. They've been working hard all their lives to get that corner office. They've now got the family, they've got the mortgage, they're looking for the next position up, VP position next, if I just do things right. Suddenly comes the pressure to innovate. That threatens everything because, hey, I might get that red blob next to my name. And so, if you've got the safety first mentality, as I call it, it's much easier to say no.
Yeah.
If you just say no to something, guess what? It just goes away. And that's great because status quo keeps on going. And this is the thing in I say, a big organization, the status quo, the bureaucracy sort of self-forms. It's an immune system, right? It's an immune system, and it forms around the status quo, which means anything which threatens that is beaten off. So anything that's outside of that little Excel spreadsheet, anything that's outside of the policy, anything that's outside of the process, anything that's a rough edge, just gets sandpapered off so that the status quo can, new ideas threaten the status quo. So that's why, as I come back to this point, you need to hive off a team of people that are out of sight, literally out of sight of management. Of course, the CEO wants to know what's going on, and this is where DBS did it really well. The guy pulled out his checkbook and said, right, here's my budget for innovation. And he had full trust that he had a really good team working on it. And they went away and they met up with fintech startups and they just hustled and they got carried away. And, they had hackathons, and I forget the exact numbers now, but something like out of the first hackathon, which they basically got all these guys together, bank executives, fintech startups in dirty jeans and ponytails, and said, right, you've got 72 hours. Here's the beer, here's the pizza. In 72 hours, you come back and present your prototypes to us.
There's nothing that beer and pizza can't fix in my experience. So if we, so that's fascinating stuff. And there's going to be lots of people listen to this that are in a different situation. They're not a part of a big organization. Perhaps they've just been made redundant, or perhaps they got a small business which is being threatened, or they, for various reasons, feel that they may need to take a big change in their income-producing careers. And that could be sort of pivoting to something that's existing. It might be having to find something brand new for the very first time. And if they are, be it on their own or working in a small team. So it seems from everything you've said, they actually do have an inherent advantage. And I'm sure there'll still be some nervous nights, maybe even sleepless nights, about trying to find what this opportunity, where it is, and how they can serve it. So if someone's in that situation but doesn't yet perhaps have an idea about where this innovation might be that could provide that opportunity for them, where do they start? How do they start exploring that?
Yeah, that's a great question for the times. This sort of crisis period, as I said, to me, it's absolutely thrilling. I think we've seen a surge of creativity in the last 1 or 2 months. And, we're now talking early 2020 as the crisis kicks in and deepens. I've been absolutely thrilled to see you use the word pivots, right? I think there have been 2 buzzwords which come out of this crisis. One is pivot and the other is Zoom. And I wish I'd bought shares in Zoom sort of 3 or 4 months ago, but let's talk about pivoting. Pivoting is something which should be everybody's best friend at the moment. So, what is a pivot? A pivot means you're basically going in one direction, and then either through circumstance or because of change of want or need or whatever, you dive off at a different angle. So rather than continuing in a straight line, you pivot it on a certain point. And that point of inflection is round about now for a lot of people, because suddenly business has dried up, customers have dried up, budgets have dried up. So I think it's fabulously exciting. Now, the key thing about a pivot means you're sort of keeping one foot of your existing business or business model intact, but then you're trying to find, using your other foot, where's some solid ground elsewhere. I thought that was going to be my next step, but that looks like it's turned to quicksand, right? So you're pivoting, you're searching for a new direction. It could be in front of you, it could be beside you, it could be directly behind you. You don't know. And that's why we need to be in this sort of mode of exploration, mode of discovery. And we need to be acting quickly. Now's not the time for 100-page business reports. I'd argue that never is the time for 100.
Yeah, I think those days have gone, yeah.
Well, you'd like to think they're gone, but you certainly need to be acting, doing, rather than thinking and planning. It's the whole lean startup thing of build, measure, learn. So continuous learning, quick, fast, cheap failures, all that sort of stuff. So as I said, I've been buzzed by the amount of just incredible ingenuity, creativity that's been on show as people have pivoted. And I put together a list. I mean, in working on my last book, the Power Pivot, 20 different pivot models. And it actually surprised me that there were 20. Maybe there are more, but I stopped at 20 because I thought it sort of covered all the situations. But, you know, a pivot can be anything from a kind of a 1%, 5% variation, a veering off course, if you like, you know, to a complete 180.
Yeah.
And, you know, there are just so many great examples of pivots or just ingenuity. For example, just this morning I saw on TV, this guy has got a pizza shop in the Gold Coast in Australia. And his business was down, he said, by about 80, 90%. Just suddenly people weren't, you know, obviously his restaurant wasn't accessible anymore, et cetera, et cetera. Turned out that his friend actually has a surfboard called a foil, which is a surfboard which kind of seems to fly above the water. It's a cool bit of equipment. And they combine these two ideas, and this is classic creativity. It's like what plus what equals wow. How can you combine two ideas, two existing ideas, right? Yeah. To create a new thing. So this guy said, all right, we've got the pizza, we've got this motorized surfboard, and they now deliver pizzas by motorized surfboard up the channels of the Gold Coast. And I thought that's fantastic because they are having so much fun doing it. Their customers love it, of course, because they're waiting for the pizza to be delivered. Of course, they're videoing this pizza arrival. Yeah. And of course, that goes out on Instagram, hashtag, et cetera, et cetera. And so all of a sudden there's excitement about something as mundane as a pizza being delivered. Yeah. So tremendous ingenuity. And you know, companies have changed from, let's say, being a boutique brewery to suddenly going into production of things like hand sanitizers. So that's a pivot. You change your audience, your technology. Yeah, it's a huge pivot. But you know, your technology is the same. You were dealing with these chemicals before, just before, you know, a couple of months ago. These were going into fancy gins. Instead of that, now they're going into washing people's hands. But you know, so that's a classic sort of pivot. But I mean, there are so many great ways to, I guess, come up with ideas in terms of how to pivot. But so I think having that checklist of, well, how can you pivot? And how does that save my business? How does it save my life? How does it get my people back to work? Is to me life-saving and extremely exciting. And to see the fact that, you know, businesses, I mean, so many of the big brands that we know today, the sexy kind of companies, the Airbnbs, the Netflixes, etc., actually started in the last crisis, in the global financial crisis. So there's something about crisis situations which gives us this big surge of creativity.
What's that expression? Is it, sorry to interrupt, there's an expression, I'm reaching for it right now. I think it's the need is the mother of all invention. You know, necessity.
Necessity is the mother of all invention.
That's
yeah,
exactly.
Exactly. And I think that's living it out at the moment. But you know, particularly if you talk about pivoting, which means, you know, you've got a business. I mean, another great one I came across the other day. This company, it's a printing company, so you know they print stuff. Suddenly, nobody was in the market for printed stuff anymore. And within 2 days, he thought, because he was suddenly working from home, the owner of the printing company, his dining table suddenly became like Piccadilly Circus. You know, he had 4 daughters all home from school. And so they were vying for space at the kitchen table. The wife was trying to get dinner on the table for dinner. He was trying to get work done, et cetera, et cetera. And he thought, oh, this is a problem. We need more space. He thought, if I've got a problem, maybe other people got the same problem. How do we innovate around this? So quick as a flash, what he's now done, as I say, within 2 days, he had new products on the market, which is called Build-A-Desk. So buildadesk.com, and it's in Australia. And they basically use cardboard, which was one of their raw materials in their printing company anyway, to make these self-assembly desks. So they're flat pack delivered.
Okay.
When what's terrific about it is that the kids get involved in the assembly of these things. They just slot together the bits of cardboard, slot together. They can hold up to 80 kilograms, so very strong, durable kind of things. One of the models that it comes in is actually a coloring model, so the kids can actually color in the table. So it's turned into a time-killing activity. And the great thing is, rather than laying off his people, and that business has been going as a printing company now for 5 generations, they're working through this, and not only working through it, they're hellishly busy.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, so yeah, and there was another example, and the examples just go on.
Yeah.
One of the big staging companies, and they do huge events, you know, massive theatre productions and stadium shows and rock concerts and all these things, Formula One races, they do all that big staging. All of a sudden, they had a year's work just cancelled overnight. And what they're now doing is making isolation furniture as well. So they have sort of stand-up desks. They, you know, because their central technology, I guess, is a certain kind of a router, a cutter, a computer-guided cutter, so they can cut shapes. So all of a sudden now they're making some isolation screens for supermarket tellers. They're making stand-up desks. They're making little wine racks, and sales of alcohol are sharply up in the isolation period. And, you know, so all of a sudden he's got 52 people on his team. They're all working around the clock now to ship this product out the door. And it was hacked together. Yeah, I mean, you know, the product iteration, the design, the website to actually advertise the product, this all came together in 2 to 3 days. You know, products going out the door from, oh, I've got an idea, to bang, we made it for sale. We're talking about 3 days lead time. Now, in normal peacetime, we don't think that fast. We don't act that fast typically. And so I think this is a really great salient lesson for all of us to say, well, why don't we always react so quickly? Especially big companies. I think big companies are learning now how to react quickly. And I think this crisis has done more for digital disruption than the CEO, the CTO, the whole thing combined in terms of digitally disrupting organizations. So I think we're going to see a very exciting new normal from this point onwards.
Yeah, I think we're going to see some really exciting innovations that, you know, that might take a few years before they really get traction. And at long lasting, as you say, the next Airbnbs are being born in people's garages as we speak. One sort of thing that I learned, I think this is learning this from IDEO, which people aren't aware, a very well respected kind of design engineering company that work for external clients. So they'll basically be employed, and I know you are aware of IDEO, they're employed to provide innovation, usually in terms of product or service design suggestions. And I think that their model was the way to come up with a great idea is actually to come up with lots and lots of great ideas and then pick the best one. That's a slightly light version of it. But my personal experience, that gives a degree of freedom when you're trying to think of one great idea. There's like a bit of pressure around that. And if you just, okay, I'm going to think of 100 great ideas, I'm going to give myself 10 minutes to think of it. You start to just think frantically, and they don't have to be very polished. We can worry about that a little bit later, and we can kind of play at this kind of discovery and research in a more fun, intuitive way. And then at the end of it, okay, there's 100, maybe there's 1,000 ideas there. Let's throw some away. Let's explore some others deeper, and then, you know, pretty quickly can get somewhere, I think. And for me, at least, that approach, rather than trying to think of one thing, trying to think of lots, and you might end up with one concept you're going to push forward with. But I found that
that's something. Yeah, exactly. You really hit it on the head there. There is a thing called Sturgeon's law, actually. Did you realize you just described a law of creativity?
Okay.
Yes, you did. So Sturgeon's law basically says that, let's say if you've got 100 ideas, 90% of those ideas will be absolute rubbish, total crap.
Yeah.
9 of those ideas will be, not bad. And only one of those ideas, i.e. 1%, will be the gold nugget that you're really looking for. Now, you mentioned about playfulness. That's so important when you're brainstorming. You know, your corporate culture has a lot to answer for here. And it's what I call the temperature of the boardroom. If people are living in fear of their livelihoods, you know, they're going to be really sort of shut down in terms of the way they think. It's going to be very frontal cortex based stuff. Whereas if people are free, easy, you create a safe space for them to ideate, to think, just to shoot the breeze and throw stuff out there with no fear of ridicule or social risk, the ideas are going to fly, especially if you create a culture where you build on somebody else's idea, and somebody's idea is not just taken at face value, written down on the flip chart. Instead, what you do is say, well, that could be an idea that leads to another idea, and you build on other people's ideas. Because here's the thing, typical brainstorming is very competitive, actually. And there's a lot of research to show that it's not the most efficient nor effective way of getting ideas out, right?
That's interesting.
So there's a raft of research. You know, brainstorming is now a 50 or 60-year-old modus operandi. Despite the fact that it's shown to be ineffective and inefficient, because typically what we do is we just blurt out the ideas that we came to the room with anyway. And, you know, so it tends to be very superficial. It's not as collaborative as saying, hey, that's a great idea. Let's build on that idea some more so that, you know, we can flesh it out and it becomes a much bigger idea by the time we put it up on the whiteboard. So, you know, there are actually new tools, much more scientific, which capitalize on the fact that there are advantages of brainstorming, let's call it brainstorming solo, and also brainstorming in groups. Each has its pluses and minuses. And there are techniques such as brain writing, brain drawing, for example. And all of these things are variations on brainstorming, but they get away from this whole thing of people just yelling out the first idea they thought of at the board. And that has massive kind of limitations. Yeah. So get back to your thing and Sturgeon's law. One of the most rigid laws in creativity is the fact that quantity equals quality. The more ideas you have, the better ideas you have. There'll be ideas with greater depth, greater insight. They'll just be better ideas. So the more you just throw at the wall, the better off you're going to be. It means that there's much more to come back and harvest later and sift through, and that takes a lot of time. But it's one of the firmest laws in all of creativity research is that quantity equals quality. I cannot stress that one enough, actually. And yeah, it just means that you have more options, because there's very rarely, as you pointed out, very rarely one right answer. In fact, there's almost never a right answer. There are many good answers, there are many great answers, but there's rarely anything as the right answer. Yeah, everything's possible, and the more possibilities that you explore, the more exciting and fresh and breakthrough those insights and ideas will be.
Yeah, that's a great point. My background's actually in graphic design, and it feels like a long time ago now. I still have a lot of those skills set with me. I still feel like a designer. I still describe myself as a designer. And for me personally, one of the biggest points of learning for me was I knew I didn't know. So if I was designing a logo for somebody, I knew I didn't know what this logo should be. It wasn't like I had divine inspiration. It wasn't like I was smarter or knew intrinsically what the solution should be. But in time, I became incredibly proficient on the tools I was using. I was using various computer tools. So I would probably come up with 10, 20, 100 kind of computer sketches, but sometimes it was pen and paper. In fact, often it would start with pen and paper, compared to some other people who on the desk next to me would come up with one at the same time, or just, basically I'd be throwing a lot of shit at the wall and very, very quickly go, oh, that, you're dumping stuff out, every second you come out and your brain's moving so fast that your hand can't move quick enough, which is why sketching is such an important skill. But out of that mess, something emerges which has got real validity and kind of shines like a little gem. And when you arrive there, not only is it a lot better, but you kind of know it's good because you've just been comparing it to these other 100, maybe 1,000 ideas, and that's not an exaggeration in my experience. You know, there's little subtleties between different variations, and it's like, you know, it's good because you've just been had a battle off between these other hundreds of ideas, and it's the clear winner. Here you are, client. You know, you've smashed it.
And oftentimes, I don't know what your experience is, but oftentimes within the, as you say, that pile of rubble of ideas, you know, there might be something that can be salvaged. You might throw a general idea away, but there'd be an aspect of that idea which gets to live to fight another day, and you can build on that and build that into another idea. And so this whole thing of, you know, it's really the essence, it's the definition of creativity is that, you know, one idea plus another idea plus another idea gives you a new idea, because this is the thing. I mean,